Hello, and welcome to Eastern Roman history. The first Arab siege of Constantinople was a life or death event in the history of the Eastern Roman Empire. Ever since the 630s AD, the Eastern Roman Empire had been locked in an almost continuous conflict with the Islamic Caliphate. After the space of 30 years, Egypt, Syria, Armenia, and Cyprus were lost to the Arabs. The Sasanian Persian Empire also suffered considerable losses of territory, with the empire and its last king of kings being eliminated in AD 651. The total destruction of the geopolitical makeup of the ancient world by the warriors of Islam is considered by many what heralded the beginning of the Middle Ages in Europe and the Mediterranean. The pressure on the Eastern Roman Empire intensified once the Umayyads seized power in the Caliphate after the First Fitna. This was a civil war between the proponents of Ali, the cousin of the Prophet Muhammad, and Muawiyah, the governor of Syria. The peak of this military threat to the empire during the 7th century was the first Arab siege of Constantinople that took place from AD 674 to 678. Or did it? In my video about the relations between the Abbasids and the Eastern Romans, it was mentioned that a siege took place during the reign of Constans II, but none was mentioned for the reign of Constantine IV. This is because, through the discovery and use of a wide range of contemporary sources, new editions of existing sources, and recent historiographical studies, has challenged the traditional account of the first Arab siege of Constantinople, which scholars of the Byzantine Empire have deemed one of its greatest historiographical problems. This video is the first of a two-part series that follows recent research into the siege. This video goes over the traditional account and demonstrates why it is faulty. The second, following especially the dissertation by Marek Jankowiak, will reconstruct the events of the siege of Constantinople and seek to make sense of one of the darkest and murky periods of Byzantine history. I would like to thank my generous patrons for their support, and if you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe for more content about the late Roman and Byzantine Empire. Stay notified using the bell, and now let us continue. Let us use Romilly Jenkins's textbook account of the siege to give us the general idea of the traditional version of events. Muawiyah made his advances during many years by land and by sea. The naval approach up the coast of Ionia was relentlessly pursued. The island of Kos was occupied, and then Smyrna. Finally, in 672, took Cyzicus on the Bithynian coast of the Marmara and turned it into a strong base camp. All was now ready. In the spring of 674, the siege was begun by land and by sea. Absolutely nothing was achieved. The walls of Constantinople could laugh at any assault mounted by the most enthusiastic of the faithful. At the same time, a revolutionary innovation in tactics struck dismay into the hearts of the besiegers. Shortly before this time, Callinicus, an architect and chemist of Heliopolis in Syria, escaped to Constantinople with plans of an invention, during which centuries gave maritime supremacy to the Byzantines, and was of no small service to them in siege operations by land. The weapon was brought to play on the Saracen vessels with catastrophic results. But even so, a lengthy siege was inevitable. In September 674, the besiegers withdrew across the Marmara to Cyzicus for the winter, and their commanders even further afield. In 675, the assault was renewed with equal spirit, but with lack of success. Massive reinforcements were sent, and for 3 more whole years the assaults continued. Finally, the besiegers, decimated by losses in battle, by hunger, and by disease, were compelled to desist. The army set off homeward across Anatolia, but the Byzantine resistance showed no sign of exhaustion. The Saracen ships, further reduced in number by shipwreck, were encountered by the Roman provincial navy near the southwest corner of Asia Minor and finally destroyed. On land, the provincial armies under Florus and Patronus engaged the retreating Arab forces and put 30,000 of them to the sword. Jenkins used Theophanes the Confessor's Chronographia and the History of the Byzantine State by Ostrogorsky to construct for his book the events of the siege. This essentially demonstrates what most traditional accounts of the siege are based upon. Ostrogorsky's vast influence on the field of Byzantine history has meant that a large number of historians have blindly followed his interpretation of events without criticism. As a result, historians including Ralph Lilly, Lord Norwich, Jean-Claude Cheynet, Andrew Louth, Jonathan Shepherd, Warren Treadgold, John Halden, Andreas Stratos, and even myself has essentially just copied Ostrogorsky's interpretation of events. Like all history, the issue lies with our sources, or lack of them in this case. The almost total reliance upon Theophanes by modern historians means that we must examine him first to see what is correct about his account and what is in error. Theophanes the Confessor wrote the Chronographia in the early 9th century and was not a contemporary source. To write his Chronographia, which is a chronological annals of events from AD 284 to 813, continuing the Chronographia of George the Syncelos, he used two sources. The first one can be identified using the history of Nikephoros the Patriarch, who wrote about 30 years before Theophanes. Although Nikephoros' account shares many details with Theophanes, many are missing. Nikephoros only used one source at a time, and so similarities between Nikephoros and Theophanes allow us to reconstruct the testimony of this earlier Byzantine source. This source has been identified by historians, tentatively, as Trajan the Patrician. This man wrote a historical account during the reign of Leo III, starting with the reign of Constantine IV and ending his account with the second Arab siege of Constantinople. The remainder of Theophanes' account owes to another lost history, this time by a Syriac chronicler called Theophilus of Edessa. His chronicle was a sort of ecclesiastical annal that championed Maronite Christianity. It can be reconstructed from the works of Agapius, Michael the Syrian, the Chronicle of 1234, and Theophanes. If we break down Theophanes' account into two constituent parts, we can see exactly what history contributed which information and Theophanes' working method. On the left is the element from Trajan the Patrician, and on the right is Theophilus of Edessa's. First, I shall read the account of Theophilus, and then Trajan, as testified in Theophanes. There was a severe cold, and many men, as well as beasts, suffered hardship. Phaedalus wintered at Cyzicus. In this year, Bucer made an expedition, and after taking many captives, returned home. In this year, in the month of March, a rainbow appeared in the sky, and all men shuddered and said it was the end of the world. In this year, the deniers of Christ equipped a great fleet, and after they had sailed past Cilicia, Muhammad, son of Abdelus, wintered at Smyrna, while Chaisos wintered in Cilicia and Lycia. Plague occurred in Egypt. At this point, Theophanes switches sources and starts using Trajan the Patrician. He also sent the Emir Kale, inasmuch as he was a competent and bold warrior, with another fleet to assist him. The aforesaid Constantine, on being informed of so great an expedition of God's enemies against Constantinople, built large biremes bearing cauldrons of fire and dromones, equipped with siphons, and ordered them to be stationed at the Procleancian harbour of Caesareus. In this year, the aforesaid fleet of God's enemies set sail and came to anchor in the region of Thrace, between the western point of the Hebdomon, that is the Magnora, as it is called, and the eastern promontory, named Caeclobion. Every day there was a military engagement from morning until evening, between the Brachelion of the western gate and the Caeclobion, with thrust and counterthrust. The enemy kept this up from the month of April until September. Then returning back, they went to Cyzicus, which they captured and wintered there. And in the spring they set out, and in similar fashion made war on sea against the Christians. After doing the same for 7 years, and being put to shame with the help of God and his mother, having, furthermore, lost a multitude of warriors, and had a great many wounded, they turned back with much sorrow. And as this fleet, which was to be sunk by God, put out to sea, it was overtaken by a wintry storm, and the squalls of a hurricane in the area of Sileon. It was dashed to pieces, and perished entirely. Theophanes then switches back to using Theophilus of Edessa. Now Sufyan, son of Alf, the second brother, joined battle with Florus, Patronus, and Cyprian, who were at the head of a Roman force, and 30,000 Arabs were killed. At that time, Callinicus, an architect from Heliopolis in Syria, took refuge with the Romans, and manufactured a naval fire with which he kindled the ships of the Arabs and burned them with their crews. In this way the Romans came back in victory and acquired the naval fire. In this year Abdelus, the son of Cais, and Phardalas wintered in Crete. In this year a sign appeared in the sky on a Saturday. In this year there was a great plague of locusts in Syria and Mesopotamia. In this year the Mardiites entered the Lebanon range, and made themselves masters from the Black Mountain as far as the Holy City, and captured the peaks of Lebanon. Many slaves, captives, and natives took refuge with them, so that in a short time they grew to many thousands. Theophanes then switches back to using Trajan the Patrician. When Muius and his advisers had learned of this, they were much afraid, realizing that the Roman Empire was guarded by God. So he sent ambassadors to the Emperor Constantine, asking for peace and promising to pay yearly tribute to the emperor. Upon receiving these ambassadors and hearing their request, the emperor dispatched with them to Syria the patrician John, surnamed Pizzigaudes, a man of ancient lineage in the state, and possessed of much experience and excellent judgment, that he might parley suitably with the Arabs and conclude a treaty of peace. When this man had arrived in Syria, Muius gathered a group of emirs and choresanoi, and received him with great honour. After exchanging many conciliatory speeches, they mutually agreed to draw up a written treaty of peace under oath, stipulating a yearly tribute of 3,000 pieces of gold, 50 captives, and 50 thoroughbred horses, to be paid by the Hagarenes to the Roman state. These conditions, having been approved by both sides for a duration of 30 years, complete peace prevailed between the Romans and the Arabs. After these two written treaties had been mutually sworn and exchanged, the oft-mentioned illustrious men returned to the emperor with many gifts. As one can see, these two accounts are full of inconsistencies, such as Constantine IV equipping his navy with Greek fire, and then it being invented by Callinicus the following year. Taken on their own, Theophilus and Trajan tell two quite different stories. However, credit where it is due. Theophanes managed to edit these two works together to form a half-consistent narrative, and associate the events from these two quite different works to where he thought they might fit in the chronology. For example, the two versions of the destruction of the Arab armada off the coast of Lycia was probably the same event in the two sources, but most of the other events are mutually exclusive. Theophanes' big error was putting Trajan's account of the first Arab siege of Constantinople with its thrusting and counter-thrusting, with the invasion fleet of Emir Kale and the major Byzantine victory at Silaon in AD 674. Theophilus does not mention a siege at all, and so this only comes from Theophanes misdating Trajan the Patrician. But this was not necessarily Theophanes' fault, when he had the rather jejune entries of Theophilus of Edessa to try and peg Trajan's account of the siege to create his Chronographia. We might well have made the same mistake. So, if the insertion of the siege of Constantinople into the 670s is wrong, what actually happened during that decade? By examining the 4 witnesses of Theophilus' chronicle, we can reconstruct what happened. In the first year of Constantine IV's reign, Africa was devastated by an Arab raid, and Phydalis wintered in Cyzicus. In 671 to 672, there was a raid led by Bucer. There was also a solar eclipse. The next year, an armada led by Muhammad and Abdallah ibn Qais attacked Lycia, wintering in Smyrna, Nicaea, and Cilicia. There was also a nocturnal rainbow. In 673 to 674, Sufyan ibn Auf led a huge army into Anatolia and marched on Lycia. Florus, Patronus, and Cyprian, probably the strategae of the defending armies, annihilated the Arab army at the Battle of Silaon in 674. At sea, the Roman navy burned the Arab armada with recently invented Greek fire, resulting in a double victory that turned the tide of the war. In 674 to 675, Abdallah ibn Qais and Fadala ibn Ubayyad wintered their fleet on Crete. Then, from 675 to 677, there were no further reports of Arab raids against the empire. In 677 to 678, a large corps of Byzantine soldiers called the Mardiites landed on the coast of Lebanon and occupied the heights from Amnus to Galilee, beginning a guerrilla war against the Caliphate. That same year, John, the son of the usurper Misizius, proclaimed himself emperor. No peace between the two powers is mentioned by Theophilus for AD 678, but there does seem to have been an effective end to the war, as the Caliphate now had to deal with the Mardiites, and then the second fitna after the death of Caliph Muawiyah in 680. Thus, from the account of Theophanes' eastern source, it is quite possible to rebuild the events of the Romano-Umayyad War during the 670s, without any mention of a siege of Constantinople, or a peace treaty as provided by Trajan the Patrician. The Islamic sources all record an almost identical series of events compared to the Syriac historians, but differ mainly in their dating of events. So what about the siege? Did it happen at all? To give an answer of sorts, and to end this video, I shall read the declaration of the Cartophylex George, who presented the synodical letter of the Patriarch Thomas of Constantinople to the 13th session of the 6th Ecumenical Council held on the 28th of March, AD 681. He said, "I have got here the Codex, my lord, that is the register, containing copies of the synodical letters written by Thomas, John, and Constantine, of holy memory, late patriarchs of this imperial city. In addition, I have also the original sealed synodical letter made by Thomas of holy memory, the late patriarch, to Vitalian of holy memory, the late Pope of Rome, which, when he wanted to send it to him, he was unable to do so, because, as you know, of the long-lasting incursion by the godless Saracens and their presence throughout the 2 years when he was bishop. This one letter not only allows us to accurately date an attack on Constantinople by the Arabs, but also confirms that such an attack, even a siege, did actually happen. An early Latin translation of the Acts rendered parastrasis, which means incursions, as obsessio, which means siege, perhaps to clarify the Greek. George the Cartophylax implies that from at least the 17th of April, 667, to the 14th and 15th of November, 669, for 2 years and 7 months, during the whole span of Thomas's patriarchate, he was unable to send his synodical letter to Pope Vitalian. It should be made absolutely clear that Patriarch Thomas would have expended every effort to send his synodical letter to Vitalian, because it made known the accession and the definition of their faith. It was an essential part in maintaining unity within the Church. For example, in 655, Patriarch Peter sent his synodical letter to Rome. It was rejected because of its pro-Monophyite contents, indicating schism. The rift was healed by Vitalian by sending his synodical letter to the Patriarch. In this context, the only reason Thomas did not send it was because it was physically impossible to do so, due to the siege of Constantinople. Perhaps the greatest irony is that this contemporary source has often been neglected or dismissed because of the much greater trust and authority given to the account of Theophanes and the belief that there was a siege of Constantinople in the 670s. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more history about the Eastern Roman Empire. Thank you very much to my generous patrons, and this has been Eastern Roman History.